Well, welcome back. This is Chess 102. Now, last time we covered the basic movements. Now we're going to, once again, go over some basics. Just to start off, once again, pawns go in front. There's 8 of them. Then there's the rooks, knights, bishop, queen, king, bishop, knight, rook. There's a king side rook and a queen side rook. Once again, whatever side of the board they're on, queen side or king side. It's obvious. The bottom right hand square on your board, if you don't happen to have all the lovely letters and numbers, is white. That square is white over here. If you can't see this square, it is a white square. The reason that is white is because it sets the board up perfectly. Queen is always on her own color, both sides, which means the queens face each other. The kings face each other, bishops, knights, rooks. They all face one another. Face straight across to each other, rook to rook, knight to knight, bishop to bishop, queen to queen, king to king, and all the way across the other side. Now, the basic strategies in this game, if you're a beginner, some of the really good basic strategies are called building a house. Now, you can build a house king side and queen side. Now, we're going to cover king side first, which is simply you move the king side center pawn in front of the knight, one up. You move the bishop right where that pawn used to be. Once again, this is a turn by turn, so they would move, and then you would move, they would move, you would move, they would move, because we're using white, so white goes first. White always moves first. Next, the knight goes up here, right up by the pawn, blocking the bishop's diagonal, but being guarded by both the pawn and the bishop. And then the next turn after that would be king moves 1, 2 squares, rook slides across to the other side of them. Now you have a house. You have a major, 2 minors guarding your king, and you have effective protection from the knight. You have protection here. You have protection of the pawns with many pieces. You have a fortified position that most other beginners will sacrifice a lot of material to get into. This is a very protective area, and if you're playing other beginners, it's very effective. Queen side is very similar. You move the center pawn, you move the bishop, you move the knight. You either move the E pawn or the D pawn. The D pawn is in front of the queen, the E pawn is always in front of the king. In this case, I'm going to move the E pawn up, and then you'd move the queen out, and then the king castles, which is 1, 2, queen side rook slides across the other side. See, the rook doesn't have the amount of moves it makes because this side it slides across and it moves 1, 2, 3 spaces. On this side it only moves 1, 2. So the rook slides the opposite side of the king, and now the king is in an effective house. He's protected. He has the queen, rook, knight, and a bishop guarding him. And once again, this is a stronger house than because the queen is on this side, but it's a lot harder to do. It takes an extra few moves. King side is very powerful as well because you can open up and get more of your majors and minors developed. A lot about this is development. Chess is a lot about developing your pieces. The pieces you want developed are the majors, which are the rook and the queen, and the minors, the knights and the bishop. And you want them to use both the pawns as cover and as defenders for them. But you have to watch out because there are a lot of moves that involve having pawns getting doubled, which is 2 pawns in the same row. They say he took another piece here, now he's in the same row, and they're stuck moving forward. Move this one to move this one. This one can't protect this one's unguarded. Another thing that people like to do is they'll take a pawn, right? You traded, this one went up, this pawn took him, and then you took him. Now this pawn is all alone. It's a floater. It's by himself. He's segregated. All these pawns, see how they're in a beautiful line. They can defend each other. They can move up into defensive positions and guard one another, block diagonals, block, attacks. This pawn has no such luck. He's by himself. He's one lone pawn. Now the pawn line is at full strength. It's all together. It's all connected. That's your goal, is you want to keep pawns in groupings. You want them in groups of 2 or 3 to protect one another. If they're even if these 2 pawns are way up here, and someone does this, you can move here and trade them. Yeah, you'll lose both pawns, but you'll segregate these two from the line, and you will open up an open line. That's also something you should watch out for, is opening lines. So let's take a lot of these pieces off. This is the board. I don't know, I just picked random pieces. See all these open squares? All this open lines? Well, this rook now controls this entire row and this entire row. He's over here, controls this entire row and this entire row. And anything enters this row can be killed by him. Anyone in here, he's unrefined, uncontrolled. You know, he has a large range of movement that can't be checked. He can get away from the king, he can get away from pawns, he has all that extra space. Now, as you can tell when the board starts, the only piece in the back that can move immediately is the knights, because they're blocked by the pawns. As I said last time, the only piece that can jump other pieces is the knight. The bishop can't. It has to wait for them to move out of its way. If it's an enemy piece, it has to wait for them to move or take them. And when you take a piece, you're stuck on that square, you take them. So yeah, I'd watch out. Some moves you take it and then they take you, and you took a pawn and lost a bishop. That's down material. There's a point system in chess I'm going to explain right now after the basic house I explained now. This is basically, it's based on a point system, and the point values are obviously very obvious. I'm using the white pieces because they're on this side I'm sitting on. 1 point for a pawn. Depending on the tournament, it's 2.5 to 3 points for the knight. It's always 3 points for the bishop, 5 points for the rook, 9 points for a queen, and it's the game if you take their king. If you checkmate them, that's the king, that's game over. That's Chess 102 for you. More basic movements and some strategy. Basic strategy, actually. Next, I will explain exactly how checkmate works and how you can achieve a checkmate in certain situations. 2 rooks and a king versus a king, and 1 rook and a king versus a king. And I'll show you how you get checkmate, which is basically by restricting the king's movement to no squares. King cannot move, and he's in threat. So, thank you for watching, and hopefully you have a nice day.